Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Hello, this is Jamie and Jerry from LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. Jerry, lots of conversations we've had over the past year about trends in attendance and getting parents involved has kind of been changing over the past year or so. And we're going to talk about it today.
Oh, yes. I think one thing COVID did was bring parents into education much more than they ever have been before, because they had to help provide the education, right? But I will say I've worked in several school districts and been in education for over 40 years. And the number one thing over all time has been communication. And so, as a teacher, you felt like you communicated, and people say, she never communicates. Communication is tough work.
It's 90% of success of anything. It really is.
Yes. And although you feel like you've communicated, maybe the person on the other end doesn't. And so parents want communication, but we'll probably find out today what that fine line is between too much and not enough. And it's really difficult. So I'm excited to have our guests today, Eric Daniels and Miriam Altman-Reyes, and they are here to talk to us about communicating with families, and such a great topic and a timely topic. So welcome, Eric and Miriam. We are happy to have you here with us today. Eric, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background? And then Miriam, we will have you follow Eric.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Jerry. It's so great to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity. I've been in the education space now for about 10 years. While I haven't been in the classroom, I do have two kids in public school, and I see firsthand how much and how important it is for communication to be streamlined. But throughout my career in the last 10 years, I've worked with districts across the country, both with RTM and now obviously with ClassLink, helping them tackle some tough challenges. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about how we could help with attendance and communication.
And I just want to say, when I worked with you with RTM, your communication was fabulous, off the charts. And so I am so glad that you have put your talent into helping parents. That's very exciting. Miriam, how about you?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Miriam Altman-Reyes. I'm co-founder and CEO of Kinvolved. And my background is I started my career as a teacher in a New York City public school back in 2008 and taught for several years. One of the first things that I noticed was absenteeism. My kids weren't coming to class consistently. They were skipping class periods because I taught high school students, more chronic issues. It was a huge problem. And I found that after trying a number of different interventions, the thing that really worked best was to make sure I had a strong relationship with families, was able to save their number in my phone and text back and forth. And that was great. But it wasn't super scalable when you have 100 plus students as a single teacher. So got my mind thinking, went to grad school, and at that time met my co-founder, Alex, who's our chief product officer, and co-founded Kinvolved as a winning entry into a policy competition back in 2012. So we've been at this work for quite some time, almost 10 years, and we've learned so much. I'm excited to talk more about that today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, let's jump right in and talk to us a little bit about the declining enrollment numbers and increasing absenteeism. What have you seen out there, and what are some of the trends?
Sure. So, I think over the last, attendance has been unfortunately a challenge in many, many school systems far before the pandemic. Again, we started this company 10 years ago when there certainly was a problem then. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, we, have seen a lot more students who've become absent, who have stopped showing up during remote learning in particular, became disengaged. Schools that didn't, or districts that didn't have systems in place to bring them back, to communicate with them, to continue to have that strong relationship, lost a lot of those students. And so attendance is an important indicator. It's the most critical leading indicator of graduation rates and of grade level reading for earlier grades. but it also is the first indicator of enrollment. If a kid stops attending school, of course, they're eventually, in many cases, going to disenroll. And that is hugely problematic from a social perspective, but also from a financial perspective for school systems that are funded based on attendance, in particular districts like, in states like California and Texas, two huge states, for example, but also enrollment for every single district in every single state makes a big impact, right? If you don't have a high, enrollment, if you're losing enrollment numbers, as everyone knows, the dollars that follow students are going to, fall off. And so, as we've all been reading, that both attendance and absenteeism, as well as enrollment, have become a bigger challenge for districts. Attendance, absenteeism has grown about 10% during the course of the pandemic, based on preliminary numbers that we have, that have been reported nationwide. It affects students and families in every type of district, from small rural to large urban, everything in between, every single state. And I think I just saw, I know an earlier article posted a couple of months ago that said that about 1.5 million students disenrolled from public schools. More recently, I saw that number jump to closer to 3 million students. So, that's just a tremendous volume of funds that are missing, not to mention, of course, the most important thing, which is the kids, where are they going?
Right, absolutely. I heard a lecture one time about enrollment. And, we always think about high school students and them not showing up. That's kind of where your mind goes. But this particular lecture talked about the importance of attending school the first 30 days of the school year and in the lower grades. If you're seeing those trends in the lower grades, it's a trajectory to dropping out of school. Are you finding that as well, that elementary teachers really need to pay attention to the enrollment as much as high school teachers?
Absolutely. We're seeing that a lot and talking with districts across the country. Earlier childhood education is critical in terms of setting the path for the student's success. And we're seeing and hearing declining numbers in kindergarten and lower grades, especially. And when they're missing school, developing their social and emotional capabilities becomes very, very difficult, especially at that delicate early on age. So, talking with especially districts out in California that Miriam mentioned, where enrollment numbers are down and absentee numbers are rising, getting those kids, especially in your English language learners, your families that are not native English speakers, also your technologically challenged lower income families, that's where we see the largest decline in enrollment, the highest level of absenteeism. And that's really where districts are struggling to try and re-engage those children and those families to get them back on board and to strengthen, like Miriam said, that school to home relationship.
Right. And really make them feel like they belong and we want them here.
It really does take a village to alleviate some of these issues. But what are those barriers for that proper family engagement, to connect with those families, to make sure that we are not increasing in this trend of absenteeism?
There's a number of different challenges that families are facing. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, a lot of those core issues that were causing chronic absenteeism really, expanded, especially in our communities that are, dealing with issues of poverty, unemployment, and the like. And so pre-pandemic, as I alluded to earlier, the rates of what's called chronic absenteeism, which is the number of students who are missing 10% of school days or more, which equates to approximately a month of school every year, or 2 days per month, another way to think about it, was about 15% nationwide. The numbers that we've seen show that during the pandemic, that increased at least 10% to about 25%. So it's really hard to imagine that 1 in 4 kids is chronically absent or missing 10% of school days. And at that rate, research shows that students who are chronically absent in high school have only about a 20% chance of graduating from high school on time. So it just has a direct correlation, as you would imagine, with academic outcomes and ultimately graduation, which leads to lifelong success. Some of the barriers, to answer your question, behind absenteeism, it really can vary. So when I was a teacher, part of the reason I started texting the parents was because parents often didn't know that their kids were missing school. We had like a robocalling system in our school, which I'm sure lots of people have had. And so as a teacher, I was assuming that parents were getting that information on a daily basis when their kids were missing, and they were just like not able to, help get them to class. And I was frustrated. I was like, where are the parents? But when I started talking to parents, I realized that many of them didn't speak English, and that was the way that we were communicating with them. They didn't answer the phone because even back in 2008, when I started teaching, texting was the way that we were communicating in our communities. And certainly that is definitely still the case today, even more so. And also school systems often are missing contact information for family members altogether, or the numbers have become invalid over time. And so the quality of the data is really low. So reaching out to people and they change their phone numbers. And so just getting the information to parents is not happening in many school systems. Then you get into issues where parents don't realize that missing 2 days of school per month is chronic absenteeism. When you think about it, like missing 2 days out of 30 doesn't feel like a lot. So part of it is also educating families and students about what attendance needs to look like. 90% on a test sounds good. 90% attendance is actually means you're chronically absent. And then you get into certainly more challenging issues where families are facing issues around transience, unstable housing, chronic health issues. Asthma is a huge challenge for families and students in particular. It can cause long-term absenteeism, especially in some of our more urban communities like New York City. Housing instability, I think I mentioned, lots of other more deep challenges, but it really is a range. And the last thing I'll just say is that we partner with a group called Attendance Works that has become known as they're a national nonprofit, and they've really helped set the standards for school systems and states around how to look at attendance data. And they have a model called the tiers of intervention model, whereby based on students' attendance, students fit into tier one, which means they're in pretty good attendance standing, tier two, meaning that they're moderately chronically absent, or tier three, meaning that they need more deep intervention. And so we've actually built our product Kinvolved, which I know we'll talk about further later on, to support students in each of those tiers in different ways, but in particular, tier one and tier two, just to have a little bit of a structure on how you solve some of those challenges. Probably jumped ahead a little bit there, but
and if I could add one more barrier that we've been seeing and hearing a lot of, and Jerry alluded to it earlier, is the over-communication that's been happening throughout the pandemic and that ineffective, unified method of reaching out to families. Families have unfortunately started tuning out districts and school leaders and teachers because, during the pandemic, they're getting 10, 15 messages a day from 5 or 10 different sources, and they don't know what to listen to. So figuring out an effective way to communicate, streamlined and direct, but compassionate as well, with a positive spin, getting families to want to re-engage is a big piece that's missing.
It's funny. It's almost like the boy who cried wolf, right? We keep giving too much or sharing too much. It's like, all right, I've heard that, I know that, or they just, get to a point where it's just too much. Yeah. Has to be filtered in some way.
Absolutely, somehow.
Yeah, and there's lots of behavioral science and research around like what communication needs to look like to make sure it's effective. The frequency, the modality of communication, the language that you use it within communications. There's research behind all of that. That's really important to ensure that you're getting those open rates, that you're getting information to parents at the right time, at the right frequency, and in the right way that they're going to, either take action or respond. And that applies to other areas outside of education as well, but that's definitely, really important. And, not to district, lack of credit they're not experts in that field. But, that's where additional partners like Kinvolved can come in, who do really, know what communication, should look like, and have based our product around the science behind it.
Yeah, and like the format too. I mean, when you have lots of words, people immediately tune it out. But when things are bulleted and bolded in the right way, all of that really plays a role as well. And of course, the mode, right? Because and making sure we get it out in all different forms. So just as students have different learning styles, and we need to differentiate and accommodate all of them, so do parents, and of course their lifestyle plays a role. So as you mentioned earlier, texting, in addition perhaps to email, having all different modes is really a great way to make sure that we're reaching them in ways that are convenient for them and most understandable for them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And giving them, just like in the classroom with students, like you alluded to, Jamie, giving parents also the option to choose how they want to receive communications, and even choose how they want to receive communications about attendance versus the bake sale versus notifications from the superintendent. that's also really important.
One of the things I would think would be difficult is getting the information to people, but yet having empathy as you give them the information, because people don't want to just hear, my student isn't showing up, my kid isn't doing this. We want empathy. Has that been a barrier in getting information out to people?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things we work very closely with our districts is not just the mode that you reach out, but what your words truly mean. So we work with our districts on personalizing their messages, making sure that you're including the child's name, making sure that you are making the family member feel like you truly know their child, and then taking as positive a spin as possible and actually tracking what you're doing and how you're messaging the families. So keeping an eye on the types of messages you send. If you send one negative message, Gottman's principle says you should send at least 5 positive messages to overcome that negative message. So by tracking and being cognizant of the types of messaging that you're sending to those families, that alone can help make a big difference in re-engaging the families and getting them to want to hear from you again, because that's the biggest thing is that tuning out, or one of the biggest challenges. So absolutely.
Yes. So we don't like those gotcha messages. We want the support you messages. Yes.
Exactly. John, you had a great week. Let's look forward to another one on next week. Instead of yeah.
And even when you're sharing information around attendance, the traditional way that districts are doing this, if a kid is absent, is you miss school, sending out, most states require that districts send out an official letter at a certain number of days that a kid is missed, like 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. In some states, they still send kids to, truancy court. And it's really a punitive way of handling truancy, when oftentimes families are, it's not nefarious by any means. Everyone wants their kids to go to school, right? There's most of the time there's something going on. And so, really, we're seeing that more districts and more states are shifting their policies to take a more empathetic approach at solving the problem. But, still these letters often are like, I've even seen letters that have a format that looks like they're coming from like the police, and they're an official letter, so that they're trying to get people to open it and impress that urgency. But obviously that creates a lot of anxiety and negative, emotions around it. So one of the things that we've done is, in working with a group called Proving Ground out of Harvard, we built what we call digital attendance postcards. So not only we digitize the entire process of sending out those letters and those communications in a visualized format through text and email, but the language is particularly crafted in a way where it's not negative, it's not punitive, it is putting the information in context, helping families understand this is where your student is. They're in tier 1, which is good. They're in tier 2, which is moderate. They're in tier 3, which is chronically absent. Here's the call to action. We want to help. And having that kind of framing in that language gets a very different response from families, as you're saying, than sending something that looks like a police, an official, court document or something like that.
We were just working with a superintendent, and she referenced her, she was on a podcast, and she referenced her communication team. And I thought, well, that sounds really luxurious. A lot of schools don't have that. And it is important to have this marketing type approach to communicating as you're describing. So how does your solution help, especially with those schools who don't have a department to do that?
Absolutely. And what Kinvolved looks to do is not only make an impact in the family engagement and attendance areas, but we look to streamline and automate processes for districts, saving time, money, and resources. So we can actually put in place a system, which is Kinvolved, that will set the districts up to send automatic attendance reminders and nudges and attendance postcards based on thresholds that the district leaders yourselves would define. So if you wanted messages to go out to families, if a student missed 2 days in a given week or 4 days in a given month, or whatever parameters you want to set, those messages can then be sent automatically, translated in 85 languages with pictures and all kinds of other things included in that positive spin and message. Again, all trying to reduce those barriers of engagement and make a true difference. As we all at Kinvolved look to do, we're super passionate about what we do and look to make a real impact.
When you say postcards, do you mean physical postcards?
No, those, what
like,
we're talking about is we've digitized, as Miriam mentioned, the physical attendance mailers that you would do, and can send those via text message as an embedded picture, whereby a family member will get a very simple text message with a link. They click the link on their mobile device and it will pull a digital attendance postcard up on their phone or on their computer that will be easily understood, very visual, and very, very user-friendly in terms of that family member, whether their literacy level is high or low, or there's a language barrier, they'll be able to pull that basic information out of that and understand what's going on.
On the school district's end, part of the challenge is that with those traditional ways of like sending things through the mail, as you might expect, families that are homeless, that are transient, that don't have a permanent address are often, because they're dealing with so many different challenges, like those students are much more apt to be chronically absent. And so if you're sending a letter to someone who doesn't have an address or is moved, it's not ever getting there, and the district never knows. So when you send it digitally with Kinvolved, you're able to actually see the open rates. There's a whole report that shows who's received it, who's opened it instantly. And then again, there's that instant call to action where a family member can schedule a meeting with the district if that's what they want them to do, or with the attendance clerk of the school, or make a phone call to the main office, or just respond back to the message. And so you have that instant ability to make sure the message actually went through as well. And for those families who maybe it didn't, because you need to update the phone number, you also know that, so you can create that targeted list of, okay, this didn't work, so we need to do something different. But without something like that, districts just never know. They're just putting information out there, going through USPS and hoping that it, hits the right landing spot.
Yes, and I love the idea that you are really targeting it and streamlining the information and then giving them the phone number immediately, because people are so busy. If they have to stop and look up something, it gets dropped, right? But I also like that they're just getting one message, because I don't think they get fatigued from all of hearing from every single teacher, that really kind of irritates you as a parent, because you don't have time for all of that. We're really using some great communication principles here as you work with our school districts. It's great. What other best practices are you seeing?
Some of the things that we look at is, again, trying to maximize the messaging that you're sending and unifying your communication to make sure that you're not having the same messaging being sent to family members over and over again by different members of the team. So, while a high school student may have 8 or 10 different teachers, advisors, and so forth, with a system like Kinvolved, you actually have visibility into not just what messages are sent, but who sent them and when they were sent and when they were received. So when any one of those teachers at a district logs in, they'll see that the science teacher in period 1 already sent a message to the family about an absenteeism or about an assignment, so that the guidance counselor 2 hours later doesn't need to resend that same information. But what we're also seeing is getting families involved and engaged goes a lot more than just attendance, and setting up the ability to communicate across the board and across the district in an effective manner. That's where we really see the needle being moved. And, Kinvolved is super flexible. So we have districts utilizing it for their sports teams, where their coach will have their own individual group for free and reduced lunch pickup, for all kinds of social and emotional activities. We have one district that's using it for PTA meetings to drive PTA attendance and such. So, taking that holistic approach to communication and just thinking about the way that we're addressing our families, taking that positive spin, being more direct, not over communicating, just having those things in mind can make a huge, huge difference. And then obviously a system like Kinvolved will help push them over the edge and really make an impact.
It seems customizable for sure, which is really helpful.
I just have to ask, what is the most favorite form of communication? Is it texting?
Yeah, absolutely. By far and away, the majority of our families prefer texting. In some districts, they don't even capture email addresses because families just, don't submit them, or they don't use email as frequently. as with texting. I was going to just quickly add, sometimes people ask us what's the, where did the name Kinvolved come from, or Kinvo? So Kinvo is our product, which is of course a shortened version of Kinvolved. And Kinvo is now a full suite of different products that we offer. We have the postcards. We have a version of the product called Kinvo Connect that's just for general communications, no attendance automations, and then Kinvo Attend, which includes all of the whole bundled together. But Kinvolved comes from, some people know this, or like think of it right away, and some people don't. The idea of getting the kinship network, that whole family group, and that doesn't have to be like parents and siblings. It could also include grandparents, pastor, coach, rabbi from the whomever it is. It's really whomever qualifies as the loose term of the kinship network, and ensuring that they have that circle of support around the students and a way to communicate with one another and really make sure that all the gaps are closed to help the kid, continue to be successful in school. And so again, like research shows that the best way to keep kids in tier 1, which means they're in good standing with attendance, to make sure that there are those strong positive relationships and positive communications between school and home, whatever home looks like, whether it's the basketball coach or the grandparents or whomever. And that's really, why we focus on attendance communications, but also making the platform really a broad solution that can be used for a lot of different types of communications as well.
It's funny you mentioned the name, because when I saw it, I thought it was brilliant. The kin and the involved, I thought that was great, but it's also a very positive approach. The name it gives me a positive feeling when I hear it. So I thought you did an excellent job choosing that name for this system, because I think that's where you're trying to go with all of this.
Yeah, and I think circle of support, that really it exemplifies the importance that we all need to be involved. And then it seems like your solution really does take into consideration all of these barriers, all of the factors, and all of those different people, the parts of the community that we have in order to support our student population to keep them moving forward. But thank you so much for sharing all of these great tips and advice for best practices in communicating with families. Your website is what?
www.kinvolved.com, KINVOLVED.
All right, wonderful. We'll have that linked in our description here. But thank you so much for joining. And don't forget, everyone, if you are taking advantage of our podcast, make sure that for every 3 within our choice boards that you watch or listen to, that you submit it for CEU credit. And we'll have the link for that in the show notes as well.
Thank you for being guests today and talking about this very difficult topic of communicating effectively. We loved all of the advice and suggestions that you gave our audience.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.